It's Ash from Super Videos back for another sneak peek breakdown for an upcoming episode of The Walking Dead. This is going to be my sneak peek breakdown for two new sneak peeks that they released for Season 10 Episode 7, which is called Open Your Eyes, the lead up to the mid-season finale. Now, one of these sneak peeks is actually the opening minutes of the next episode, Episode 7, and one of them is just a sneak peek. And both of these sneak peeks actually are very interesting and they get me very excited for what's going to happen in this episode or what might potentially happen in this episode. So the first sneak peek we're going to look at is actually the opening minutes. The opening minutes of the episode, which was revealed on Talking Dead. So we have Siddiq, and he's getting another PTSD episode. So we're getting flashes of what happened at the barn again. So Siddiq here, he's not feeling too well. He looks at his hand, and his eyes are a little blurry. And then he hears screaming sounds in his head, and it's obviously things that he would have heard when the massacre scene happened at the barn. And then we get this flash of Enid fighting back. Now this shot, we've seen it before. It was actually in the very first flashback that we saw from the barn scene. So we've seen this before, but again, it is very interesting that he sees Enid over and over again. As we mentioned before, every flashback that we have, every time Siddiq gets one of these PTSD episodes, Enid is there. He either sees Enid in his head or he hears Enid screaming or who sounds like Enid screaming. So that's extremely interesting. And there's obviously a lot of speculation that Siddiq might have had something to do with the murders. At this point, I would say there is a possibility, but I'm not totally sold on that just yet. But I am keeping an open mind to see what's going to happen. But what we know for sure is that we're gonna, one way or another, get a reveal in this episode. Whether Siddiq had something to do with it, and whether he's guilty and he's a traitor, or he had nothing to do with it. And it's just that he has PTSD. He witnessed this brutality firsthand, and because of that, he still has PTSD. I'm not sure if I would be disappointed or underwhelmed if that happens at this point, but let's just see what we get. And then Siddiq comes out of his episode and he begins banging on his chest as if his chest is hurting or something, and then he hears more screaming in his head and he covers his ear again, looks around, it's all blurry, and then he runs outside and jumps into, I think, the lake that's at Alexandria, and that's where the sneak peek ends. So part of this was already in the trailer as well, specifically the part where he's in the water. I think it's very interesting that they're starting this episode with a Siddiq PTSD moment. And then the second sneak peek is actually a scene where Daryl and Carol bring the Whisper prisoner back to Alexandria. So they did capture that prisoner at the end of last episode, and in this scene, they're bringing that prisoner back to Alexandria, putting him in a cell, and most likely going to interrogate him to get information out of him. Then, as Daryl walks in, Lydia is in the jail cell, which is interesting. So, obviously, Negan is not there anymore. He escaped, but Lydia doesn't fit in. The only place that she feels protected and safe is in this jail cell, which is very interesting. And I think that it does give us a good indication where Lydia is at in terms of her mindset. But Daryl says, come on, get out. We need this cell. And then they bring this Whisper prisoner into the cell. Lydia leaves. But as she leaves, she kind of looks at or stares at this Whisperer. And what this is, it's basically Lydia recognizes the Whisperer. So then Carol looks at Lydia, but they take the prisoner inside. Lydia leaves, and then Daryl and Carol look at each other, and then Carol goes outside. Carol asks, "You know him?" referring to the Whisper prisoner. Lydia says, "He's the one that watches the Guardians. I mean the Walkers." So, two interesting things here. One is that Carol was right on the money. She hit the jackpot in terms of who she chose or who was in her way that she took back as a prisoner. If there's anyone that would know where Alpha's hoard is, it's probably this guy. So it's very interesting that Carol happened to capture this prisoner. Did Carol know about this, or was it a coincidence? I think it was a coincidence, but I think it was a very lucky thing for Carol and the survivors. But the other thing that's very interesting is Lydia says Guardians first, and then she says, I mean the walkers. Obviously, guardians is what the Whisperers call the walkers, and the walkers are what the survivors call the walkers. So, in a way, this shows that Lydia is still transitioning from her Whisper self into a survivor at this community. So I thought that was very interesting. And then Carol asks, so he knows where your mother's hoard is? And she says, probably. That's where Father Gabriel walks in and basically starts hitting back at Carol for what she did, leaving, bringing back a prisoner, and all of that. He has a point, not gonna lie, but Gabriel says, you put us all at risk, which is very true. And then Carol says, we have to find the hoard before it shows up at our gates. And then Gabriel says, so you decide for all of us, knowing what it could mean? That's a very good point. And I think Gabriel is asking Carol the tough questions. And he's asking her things that Daryl should have probably asked. But then Daryl walks in saying it doesn't matter anymore. We still have to find them, referring to Alpha's hoard. And then we have a moment where there's an awkward silence. And then Gabriel says, I'm going to be with you there, and Siddiq is going to treat his wounds first, referring to the Whisper prisoner again. So Gabriel wants to be there because he doesn't trust Daryl and Carol. He doesn't trust that they're not going to torture the guy. And based on the trailer, we know they're going to torture the guy. But then he wants Siddiq, who's a doctor, to treat the Whisper prisoner's wounds first. And then Carol says something that's extremely savage. She says, he bleeds until he answers. That's very savage and cold of Carol. And then Gabriel says, that's not your call. None of this is. Again, that's a very good point. She is not in charge. Not that I disagree with what she's doing, but maybe the way she did it, it's not the best. And Gabriel has a point. She's not in charge. But then Gabriel says, now you did what you did, but I'm not going to let it go from bad to worse. And I think that makes perfect sense. And then he follows that up with, and I think the council would agree, including Michonne. Now, going back to this scene here, look at Daryl. It seems like he's probably thinking, he's probably right. You know what I mean? And then when Gabriel says, including Michonne, Daryl gives Carol this look as if to say, Gabriel's got a point, Carol. Let's just slow it down a little bit. And then Carol looks at Lydia and says, come on, you can stay with me. And this goes back to what we saw earlier, which was Lydia was in a jail cell. She was by herself. She had no one to trust, no one that wouldn't judge her, no one that she could spend time with. So Carol is basically saying, you can come spend time with me. And that's all interesting because it kind of adds to Carol and Lydia's dynamic and their story together. And then we have another awkward silence. Carol walks away and Gabriel looks at Lydia. And that's pretty much the end of the sneak peek. So very cool sneak peeks. I think both of these reveal some very interesting information to us. Not too much, but just enough to get us very hyped about what we're going to see in this episode. That's it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed. See you next time for another super video. If you like what you see, press like, subscribe for more content, and press the bell button to receive notifications for daily uploads.